Let's talk supply chain.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Supply Chain. Before we begin, I have a question for you. Refrigerated trailers are becoming more sophisticated and are at an all-time high demand with pharmaceutical, grocery, and fresh meal kits. What percentage of a refrigerated trailer structure is typically made from steel and aluminum? Let me know your guesses over on social, but keep listening because I'll let you know at the end of the show. So today I'm joined by a company focused on creating flexible and customer-specific refrigerated solutions to reduce costs and drive productivity in your business. Now, they've been operating for over 50 years. Who are they? Well, they are PLM Fleet. Now, PLM Fleet is the only nationwide company dedicated exclusively to leasing, rental, maintenance, and comprehensive fleet management of over 15,000 refrigerated trailers. And today, I am joined by Don, their VP of Supply Chain Solutions. Now, Don is a recognized leader in cold chain logistics, widely respected for his expertise in refrigerated transportation, regulatory compliance, and supply chain innovation. Today, we're going to be talking all about PLM Fleet and what they do, maximizing fleet flexibility, the unique challenges of the cold supply chain, and integrating sustainable solutions into your fleet. So welcome to the show, Don.
Sarah, it's great to be with you today.
Go ahead.
No, much appreciated. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Now, I don't think I've talked too much about cold supply chain since the pandemic, when there was obviously a lot of conversation around food and beverage, but also healthcare, obviously, and specifically vaccine transportation. So I'm looking forward to putting the spotlight back on an under-discussed area, but also an area that is growing rapidly. I mean, we've got cold chain happening at conferences throughout the industry, especially in 2026. So let's dive in. Why don't you give us a bit of an overview? Like, who is PLM Fleet? What do you do? How do you help your customers?
That's great. So PLM Fleet is really dedicated only to that refrigerated trailer. So just like what you're talking about, we breathe cold chain. That's what we're all about. So we have rental, leasing assets, technology really built specifically for the temperature operations. We help customers and our business partners manage risk. And that's really what we do, saving them time and money. We help customers to make big decisions. When we manage those risks, we look at full service leasing. You got late model in fleet leases that you can tap into, rental, track leases, managed maintenance programs. We also got our whole entire rental fleet. What we're really known for is life cycle management. Everything's got an expiration date, whether it's a banana or a refrigerated trailer. It's got an expiration date, all right? So we help people bridge OEM delays that they might be having out there with some gap trailers and things like that. What we really look at is total operational costs, what it really is. A lot of people just look at that bucket of what my lease payment is, but how does it impact the rest of your business? And that's really what we help people do. And for me, myself, I've been working for PLM for 30 years. I was in law enforcement before that. I spent 12 years in law enforcement, came to PLM after I finished my degree. And, we were in this transition period, the company. At the time, we used to do dry vans, flatbeds, some refrigerated equipment. And when we made this transition, my president at the time said, the only way, they made this transition to go to cold chain completely. So all refrigerated trailers. So that's all we do for the past nearly 27 years now. And he said to me, the only way we're going to learn this business is get in a cab and ride with the drivers. So that's what I've been doing. For nearly 30 years, I've been riding on trucks, following cases through the supply chain. And what this has given me is some expertise in this realm. And so to the point where I am the immediate past chair for the Global Cold Chain Alliance. I'm an associate member, so I don't own a fleet or I don't direct a fleet. I'm the only, it's the oldest trade organization in the country, 130 plus years. And I'm the only associate member that was ever on the board, the executive board. And so they saw, I worked for United Nations to go to Nigeria, did a couple projects there. I've worked things in China, Southeast Asia, South Africa. So I've been all over the world looking at this. I'm one of the authors of the Best Practices Guide for Cold Chain Transportation. I was consulted by Operation Warp Speed to put vaccines out
Wow.
to the nation. I was actually after that when we were coming out of the pandemic. I was part of they asked me at the Joint House and Senate Agriculture Committee to look at how to build a more resilient supply chain in light of the pandemic. I teach professional development. I speak regular at conferences, and that's a little bit about the company, a little bit about who I am.
Wow, there's so much to unpack there. And I wrote down so many different notes because I loved the words that you're using. And we're going to get into life cycle in just a minute. But the fact that you're managing risk, which I always talk about this all the time on the show, is where do you want to spend your risk dollars, right? Like every time we are making a choice, whether to go down path A, path B, maybe a path C, and all of them have inherent risks. And so I love that you said that you're managing the risk, but also I want to go back because law enforcement to supply chain. I mean, I talk about how people fall into supply chain all the time, but law enforcement to supply chain, I mean, that's fascinating because those are two very, very, very different worlds. Although more and more today, they are overlapping because we've got a lot of cargo theft and things like that that are happening in the industry. And
So
one more, sorry,
I'll
go
just
ahead.
add, so managing risk and law enforcement and this particular career that I've got, it actually parallels very well.
Mhm.
So I've been able to utilize that. I work much like an investigator when I ride on these refrigerated trailers, and that served us well under the Food Safety Modernization Act. It really took FDA from a reactionary regulatory body to a law enforcement body with powers of arrest and to be able to put you in jail. So this has served us well during this time.
Amazing, amazing. And it really just goes to show how we've got transferable skills from, other places in our lives, whether we're staying at home with kids and going back into the workforce, whether we're in law enforcement coming into supply chain. And then, doubling down on what you said about riding in a cab. I've had this discussion with a lot of entrepreneurs in the industry, a lot of professionals in the industry, and really to understand what happens on the front line, especially with all of those drivers, is to take a drive with them and really see what happens, really do that investigative approach. So I love that. Now, I want to get back to life cycle management because you talked about you talked about life cycle management. But PLM takes a personalized life cycle management approach. What do you mean by that? Like, can you talk to us about the consultative approach you take and what that problem identification, solution development, onboarding, and integration process typically looks like?
That's a great question. And really, PLM stands for P, personalized, L for life cycle, and then M for management.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, so it's, we look at it, it's not a contract. It's a life cycle that you're getting in. So what we do is we work with a business model where we work backwards to your particular service promises and your cost targets. Okay. The challenge in the leasing world is that all the companies out there asking customers to live in the financial world, their world. So
Okay.
it's what you can buy an asset for and what you can sell it for at the end of the term. The challenge these companies have is that, if you have, a certain 5-year contract or, your life cycle should be 5 or 6 years. And that particular asset, they only want to offer you an 8-year deal on that unit because they have to push it out so long. So I'll give you an example. 28, 30 or 28 footer couple side doors with a lift gate on the back end of it. There's not really a good residual value on it. So, they make the customer partner with that residual value. And so what we do is we remove that because we're going to bring that asset into my rental fleet. So I'm not worried about what the residual value is after 5 years. I'm really worried about what it's going to be at the 10. So that's what we look at. So the other challenge is that everything has a life cycle. Everything, a banana's got an expiration date, like I said in the beginning, and so does a trailer. So things start to break down. If you're leasing things, things will break down after so many miles or so many hours that you go. So that's what we look at. We do a consumption-based analysis based on these 15,000 trailers we have rolling around. How long is that going to last for you? You want the new car smell whenever you're leasing an asset. You don't want to lease a car for 10 years, right?
Right.
You want to lease it for 2 or 3. That's the only thing they'll let you lease it for. So we have a holistic approach. We look at fleet planning. We go in and we look at application design, what that trailer is going to look like, how it's going to be maintained. We do on-site services, reports and analysis. How do you run your business? Okay, we're in the cold chain. We're in there with you. We're not just going to provide you the asset. We're going to give you safety and compliance. What are the FSMA requirements on the Sanitary Transportation Rule Act that you're going to have to comply with? Help you with that. You need peak seasonal needs or you need gap units. We have the rental equipment. What's the end date? So we have disposition. And ultimately, the financial policy for the risk management. Why are you going to pay $120,000 for an asset, cash, or you finance it and it's out there, it's on your books? Why not just pay the monthly fee? Right in, you get in without all that financial risk. And so we use that consultative approach that you talked about. And really, it's looking, I look at the DNA of a company, the distribution needs analysis, okay? So that involves getting in the truck. I will promise you that passenger side of the truck is not meant for a passenger. It's put a lunchbox on there because there's no spring ride or anything like that. It's there's no air ride on that side or whatever. So we'll do a ride on, we'll walk through your facility. From that, we're able to help you look at spec and design. We look at the commercial mix of what you have, short-term rentals, flexible leases, whatever you need in there. And then onboarding, how did that delivery look? And then any business reviews periodically with you, looking at utilization. We'll actually go in and tell you if you got too many assets, because we'll look at that if it's not leaving your yard and stuff. That's kind of opposite what a leasing company would typically do. No, you need more. What we're going to do is we're going to tell you what is the right size for you. And of course, we look at refresh and retire on those assets, which can. So that's a little bit about what we do on that realm.
Well, and there's a couple of things there because, how much are you running as well? Because with refrigerated, there's that special component of how often are you running that unit to be able to keep the product at the temperature that it needs to be running. And that looks different for not only every asset, but it looks different for every company. And so you do need a customized plan around, like you said, how many assets, like you're helping with capital. Because if they have 10 and you're like, well, you only need 8 based on your business as of today and what we've put together as far as our needs analysis, and so you're being able to take capital potentially off the books, depending on whether they're leased, whether they're rented, whether they're an asset specifically on their books. And then I also want to point out, you used an acronym DNA and you spelled that out. And I really appreciate that because we have so many acronyms in this industry that not everybody can keep on top of those. And I think it's super important that you did that. So I appreciate you for doing that. Now, if we look at some of the current landscape that's happening right now, what do you think are some of the biggest pressures that your customers are facing? I mean, we often hear about things like, especially tariffs, driver shortages, rising insurance, capacity imbalance. What does that look like specifically within the refrigerated sector?
Yeah, super good question. You've really nailed out all of them right there. So we're actually in the midst of the great freight recession that's been happening.
Still?
Following the pandemic, yeah. So part of that was driven by too much money, too many people taking opportunity with the spot market. So people moved out of contract rates, went to it because, hey, you could pay the money and get the fleet down the road. So that added a lot of capacity into the marketplace. A lot of people jumped in, bought extra assets and stuff like that. And so that capacity demand is starting to shrink. And there's a couple of different reasons why that's shrinking right now. Part of it is some regulatory pressures that are happening with CDL licensing. They're tightening up the documentation and the training standards that are really reducing that driver availability. We really haven't heard too much about drivers lately because there are a lot of drivers on the road right now that are pulling it down. So you mentioned tariffs. Yeah, we just recently heard about the Supreme Court striking down the 302 rule section that really talks about the International Emergency Economics Powers Act. So, people were dancing in the streets. I heard, basically when the news came out and they were thinking, okay, it's over. All right, it's over and we can move on. Not so fast. Okay, so immediately you heard the administration really go to the 122 Trade Act of 1974, which he can oppose. They can impose typically up to 15% tariffs. This is a temporary fix for up to 150 days. There are other types of tariffs that actually are there, that levers that can be pulled by the administration. So the other thing was, you mentioned a little bit about steel and aluminum, okay, earlier. So that's under the 232 Act. So any imported steel and aluminum has a 25% tariff on it. That does not change under the 302 rule because this is a different rule.
Right.
And so this also impacts, cars and all those type of things, and washing machines and refrigerators and stuff like that, because that's what they've been put under. But it also impacts heavy duty to medium trucks and trailers, and all the key components as far as replacement parts. So OEM constraints are there. They're pushing out lead times. You mentioned OEMs, so they're pushing out the build times. We buy a lot of refrigerated trailers, and we have to call almost daily to find out what the production rates are, and that's kind of a long run. So here's one that is a little bit, maybe a lot of people don't have in the windshield, which is broker liability. A couple of months ago, the Supreme Court just accepted a case where two truckers got into an accident. One was actually hired by a broker. Okay, so what they're asking to do is they're asking the courts, and it's been back and forth in the lower courts, and finally it's gotten to the Supreme Court, that a broker would have liability for the trucking company. So they would typically take, and maybe somebody's reliable, but someone's going to be low cost. And if that happens, they're going to have to vet their trucking companies that their brokers deal with, because they're going to be on the hook. So that's all that happens. So what PLM is doing is helping people to understand this and then to manage those risks on doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, helping to, there's so many things that we need to keep on top of. I mean, you just mentioned a few with tariffs, but then you also mentioned a few with the drivers that you are hiring, or the brokers that you are hiring, or the carriers that you are hiring, right? Mm-hmm. And I go back to what I sort of said earlier, is that there's inherent risk with any decision that you are making. And you just need to decide where you want to spend those risk dollars and what they actually mean to that organization. Now, I want to go back to what you were talking about in regards to OEM lead times for both trailers, TRUs, because I think those have stretched dramatically in recent months. I was actually talking about this, but in the airline industry, which is fascinating, just the other day on my live show, because they were saying that since the pandemic and the demand surging, they actually can't get parts for almost 12 to 18 months. And so they're running old assets like old airplanes and things like that as they get through some of this demand and wait for some of those parts to come in to be able to create, the new assets. What's driving those delays in this scenario? Like, how is that impacting how refrigerated fleets plan, scale, replace their assets?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it really get asked quite a bit. And so this almost is a liken into the pandemic stretched out. They built a lot of capacity. A lot of trailer orders were going in during the pandemic to be able to, during the pandemic, 2+ years to get a refrigerated trailer built. Okay, wow. So people had to wait for a very long time for that. So that demand was up there, and during this great freight recession, it is really reduced. So these trailer manufacturers, they have cut their capacity because they're just trying to survive at this point. Trying to build new supply chains because of tariffs and things like that, workarounds that they could potentially do. So they're having to get kind of creative, and so those tariffs have had negative impact on what customers are wanting to buy. If you're out there, you're like, okay, so if I buy this refrigerated trailer for 120,000 or whatever the number is, and next week the tariffs come off, like the Supreme Court did, is it going to be worth $100,000? So
Yeah.
it's like buying gold and then it dropped on you, and you're like, oh my goodness, I lost all this money. And so I don't want to keep that trailer for 8 or 10 years and have to pay money to get rid of it because the residual value or whatever wasn't there. So they're really looking at that. So they've had to make the hard decision to cut staff, skilled labor out. They're eking it out at this point. But what's happening is I don't think they're going to respond very quickly once that capacity. They're going to be happy with a line of in queue for a year or year and a half. That's going to hurt when the snapback comes. That's the challenge that companies are going to have. ACT Research, you may know them. They study all this stuff. They tell us that trailers have never been older than they are today. So part of that challenge is when a trailer gets that old, things start to break on it. Okay, expensive things, compressors. Yes. So if I'm going to put $6-8 grand into a trailer this year because it broke and I hadn't bought it and it's past my prime time that I usually normally use it for, then am I really going to get rid of it next year? Probably not. You're probably going to hold that asset on there, and then other things are going to break. You're going to keep. It's going to be this never-ending cycle there. You're going to suck your money down. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that the Great Freight Recession really. Looking at those markets, they are coming back. The spot markets come back. Contract markets typically follow a couple of months after that. Pricing from manufacturers is not likely to change. Okay, it's only going to go up. You've got OEMs that are working on reduced production lines, expected to continue to increase. Trailers have never been older than they are today. My message to the industry: put your orders in now. Okay. Go, come to PLM. We'll help you manage that risk so you don't have to take the hit. Transfer that risk to another entity like a PLM.
Yeah, well, and I go back to my example around the airline industry because it sounds like that's where we're headed with this. And if that's the case, you're looking at 12 to 18 months to really be able to get a trailer. And so what are the solutions in between that? Who can you partner with? Because realistically, at the end of the day, when we're in those types of situations, it's really about supplier management. It's really about the relationships that you have with partners like a PLM that will put you first, so that you do have access to those assets and make sure that you have the capacity for your customers to be able to handle their demand when that comes back and it spikes. And you can't turn around and tell them it's going to take us 12 to 18 months to get back on track. I mean, that's not good for anybody's business. So I appreciate you for sharing sort of that landscape and what that looks like and what we need to think about, moving forward in our business while we're still in that recession today. So with the freight bounce back ahead, right, which is what you just talked about, one of PLM's strengths, as we've talked about and as you've mentioned, is flexibility, especially in an environment where OEM availability is tight, demand cycles are fluctuating. Walk us through the flexible rental and leasing solutions that you have, and how do they help the customers right size or stabilize their fleets as we're moving into that environment that you just painted for us?
Yeah, it's a question that I'm asked continually by customers. Again, we go back to managing your risk always. We'll just continue to go hammer that one home. Short-term rentals are really great for peak seasonal needs, or you've got a new business lane that just picked up. You're able to get into it very quickly. We can help you with that. Where you maybe need some emergency coverage. You can rent a refrigerated trailer for a day. Okay.
Right.
It can be as long or as little as you need. Really right sizing those term leases that we talked about is what was my fleet. If I haven't bought for a couple of years, I may need to fill in some gaps. Let me get rid of those units that are old. Let me sub those in with maybe a 2 or 3 year with a more recent in fleet piece of equipment that PLM would have. and to be able to push that in there, put that in for 2 years until I get to that cycle where I can order. So if I'm a year out in ordering, I better order next year. So that always comes into the fleet planning. When are the cycle times? What's the intel telling me? And really what you do is you get to these flexible leases, like I said, really to your life cycle, or maybe it's even a contract cycle that you want to get. You don't want to get an asset for 8 years and then your contract's only 5. And then if you don't renew it, you're going to renew it, I'm sure. But if it doesn't, you have that managed risk of 3 years that you're going to have to worry about. And of course, managed maintenance program, I already have equipment. It's costing me money. I don't really understand, how do I do my PM schedules, my uptime predictability. I can actually use a PLM managed maintenance cycle that I can plug in there. The big thing is that what this does is we can bring calm to your P&L. You're really worried. You're going to have to put your capital in other things. You talked about that a little bit earlier, you were alluding to. And really, how do I stabilize my service to my customer? How do I stabilize my income? Do I really want to invest in a depreciating asset? As soon as I buy it, it's worth less than it was yesterday. Mm-hmm. So, why not put money into something that appreciates?
Well, and I like the use of the word calm. We're gonna bring calm to your P&L. I mean, who doesn't want to hear that? Especially in some of the chaos that we've kind of been in as far as supply chain, right? We've touched on it with tariffs and, freight capacity and all that kind of stuff. And so, but also I'm thinking about flexibility when organizations or companies are thinking about new revenue streams. Maybe they haven't been in cold chain before. And maybe one of their customers have come to them and said, listen, we're going to bring on this new line. We're going to need specific refrigerated trucks to be able to handle sort of the temperature norms that we need to be able to move this product. Can you help us? And a lot of times especially now, you don't really want to say no to new business. And so this really gives you the flexibility to dip your toes, I would assume, into something like this so that you can say yes to your customer.
Right. Absolutely.
Love that. So I think there's also been conversation in the industry about how changes in the regulatory documentation requirements of CDLs might reduce the number of drivers who can legally operate. And this is a big deal, right? We've gone from driver shortages to lots of drivers on the road, but now there's some different requirements that could shake that up even further. What impacts are you seeing or maybe anticipating for refrigerated fleet specifically? And how does PLM help industry to meet those challenges? Because again, I go back to partner, right? You need to have partners to be able to manage through some of the chaos and some of the disruptions that come to play and come to us almost on a regular basis.
Yeah, great thing. I think we've all seen the news media where a undocumented CDL driver, not from this country, driving down the road, hits someone, someone's killed. So it makes a big news splash. So we are seeing these drivers out there that don't even speak English. So one of the things that DOT just recently did was they're going to require English only on the CDL testing. Okay. That doesn't go on now. Well, if I take California, the state of California actually gives a driver's test, and they have their own skills proficiency test. You could take it in 20 different languages in that state.
But the road signs aren't in 20 different languages, and I think that's part of the main point.
Correct. The main point is that everything is in English, and you need to understand the English and things like that. So in order to do that. So we're seeing some government intervention right now under CDLs. And look at it. So FMCSA Drive Safe program, they do this on an annual basis. It's a 3-day program typically. This year they did it in 26 states, and they pulled over 8,200 trucks in these 26 states, a combination of DOT and then the DOT in the states. State police, they pull them over, or they go to the weigh stations and actually do a walkthrough, make sure your brakes are good, your tires are good, all those type of things. Well, this time they went out and they also gave a English proficiency test that they did. 2,000 out of the 8,200 were actually out of service, and many of them for English proficiency, and many of them were non-U.S. citizens. What additional actions does the government take? So recently, I guess just a couple of days ago, the final number came out, the up-to-date number came out, that 7,000 CDL schools have been closed in the U.S., okay? These are basically puppy mill CDL schools that were actually giving out CDLs to these drivers. So once this impact of the tightened of the and these drivers start to go out, at that point, capacity will tighten up. Fleets that are working with lower margins that were utilizing these drivers that maybe weren't paid as much as maybe a truck driver that a U.S. truck driver was doing, they'll start to go out of business at that point. So that capacity will shrink and put pressure on higher rates, and then so they'll be able to do that. So fleets will look to get back to normal operating age fleets. PLM will help bring, again, we'll go back to that calm herd. So you'll have a known cost. And so it's better to know what your costs are every month than just projecting out and saying, well, I think it's going to be this way. I'll just give you an example. You buy 20 trailers at a certain date, and you go off and let's say 12 months or 13 months later, all 20, 8 tires times 20 goes bald on you. And now you got to make a big payment for all those tires, okay?
Right.
You don't do it. You just pay a monthly fee. We take care of the tires, okay? So you don't have all those ups and ebb and flows inside that. So that's what we'll be looking. Again, we go back to managing risk, tariff lead times, and then what those costs are going to be. We help give you control over that.
Interesting. And I think you also have Cold Link and Trust Link. And you sort of alluded to this at the beginning of the conversation around technology-enabled solutions, because you're not just renting, you're not just leasing, you're not just providing these flexible options. You're also investing into technology to really help your customers succeed. So what do some of those key features look like? Like, how are you leveraging trailer telematics to deliver them for customers, and what does that mean for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And PLM was the first leasing company to get involved in advanced telematics. We really waited. I mean, you could get telematics before. You could see where your asset was at as far as location on drive-ins, things like that. Look at utilization. We needed more. This advanced telematics actually gives you data off the refrigeration unit. You can look at how much fuel is in there. You get real-time location, just like all the other ones. Temperature set point, door closing, opening, actionable alerts. I'm out of temperature. Remote control operations. You have the ability, if your driver changes your temperature, you could be notified of it. You can change it on your desktop back to the original, even though he's riding down the road, to be able to do that. So I always say, don't manage the 150 trailers you got out by looking at all 150. Manage the one you got a problem with. Set your exceptions, and then you'll be able to go that. So we do reports and analysis, customize it for customers. Again, going back to the personalized theme, we look at what people do. People do what you inspect, not what you expect. And so from that, you can look at runtime, engine hours, utilization, fuel consumption, rapid fuel loss. And there's only 2 reasons why you have a rapid fuel loss. 1, you got a hole in the tank. 2, someone's got a hose in the tank. Okay, siphoning it out. Okay, what I'm alluding to. Temperature excursions. Now, TrustLink, completely different. We are actually looking at new rules coming down from FSMA, the 204 rule, which is enhanced traceability. One of the things they do is they have, we get recalls. You hear about recalls all the time and how that actually works. So what we're doing is we're digitizing the supply chain. We're actually putting a digital twin in the cloud. So we capture all the key data elements and the critical tracking events. You have 10 truckloads of something coming in the back door. You have 10 truckloads have to leave out the front door, okay, at the end of the day or first thing in the morning, because I've got 10 more truckloads coming in. So a food processor will do a lot number. So they'll do a particular time frame, give it a lot number, send it out. A lot of times, they do testing on it. If that test comes back and says there was a problem with that, they then just dispose of it. But if it's left the facility, it gets out into commerce, they don't know where it's at because our food is bought and sold so many times.
Right.
while it's in supply. Yeah. So what's happening is they're moving in a way that the government wants to understand that. So we one up, one back. What they want to do is they want to track that all the way through supply chain. So when something happens, the rule was supposed to come in effect January of this year, but they put a 30-month reprieve on it. It is the law of the land, but people have to build up for this. So this is the perfect. One example is we did frozen mangoes. I'm going to ask you a question. So they were looking at frozen mangoes. What was and we did it with Ohio State and a major food producer and a grocer. They took frozen mangoes from Peru and they put it in a grocery store in Indiana. How long do you think it took to get there?
Well, Peru is tough. It takes a long time to get. Well, and I'm assuming by ocean freight. It takes a long time to get from Peru, which you'd be surprised at because I think it takes a longer time than just from China. Oh man, I want to say like 8 or 9 weeks.
That's a really, usually people give me like 4 or 6 weeks. Okay. Took 6 months.
Okay.
So
I mean, I was at what, like almost 3 months. So
the food producer was like, it took what? Because they couldn't.
Exactly.
Think about the carbon footprint of a frozen mango having to be chilled for that period of time. Okay.
Yeah, that's a lot.
If you can't track it, you can't measure it. So what we were able to do is we tracked this with temperature. Okay. We got this cool technology. Yeah, we can see everything. But we have the ability of tracking food today in the supply chain. PLM TrustLink can do that. And we can actually save you money. So, first in, first out is typically the way they do it. First, I get it in, it goes out. So we can now give you first expiry, first out. So we can give you all this information. I tell you, I crawl through facilities. I saw someone dumping out a bunch of food at their facility, and they couldn't. I had 4 people couldn't tell me why they were dumping. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. They were just told to throw it out. I crawled into the dumpster, took pictures of it, expired or near expired dates.
They need to know about Move for Hunger. I mean, that organization needs to know about Move for Hunger because we don't want that to end up in the landfills. We want that to end up with an organization like that who's a nonprofit that can move it for them and get it to the people that could use them. Now, interestingly enough, you brought up emissions, right? In that particular example. Do you have reporting on that where you can help your customers with their sustainability strategies? What does that look like?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we can do this stuff with ColdLink. So the way you think about it is, through the telematics, I can digitize an asset moving through supply chain. So what PLM has been able to do is now we can move that into the pallet and into the case itself. Okay. So it's actually like a nesting. Okay, so a Russian nesting dial, you can actually continue to move. When you get to the last mile, you're building new pallets and you don't know everything that's on that pallet. That's one of the things that FDA is going to require is what did you send to a specific store, okay, by lot number. And you're going to have to understand that. So we're able to do that today. Again, we can use existing hardware that you have, or you can go to the really cool technology where you don't have to touch anything. It just passes through portal. Think about when you go through the Home Depot and it goes, hey, Sarah, can you come back? Can I check your receipt? We can use that type of technology.
That's cool. That's cool. Now, I know you've given me a couple of examples throughout this conversation, but I really want to hone in because I have this favorite part of my episodes where I ask you for a specific case study. Like, what was the challenge a customer came to you with? What was the solution that you provided them? What was the ROI and benefit that they saw? Can you share that with us today?
Yeah, I can. I'm going to give you like a couple of different ones, and it'll be short. We had a food distributor, and the first example I gave is new versus old. Okay, so their assets, they had 55 trailers, and they kept their units for about 10 to 12 years is what they were doing. They do about 1,800 hours a year. We actually took them into a life cycle management. Said, hey, you really need to be 6 years. So the average age would be 3. Okay, and so from that, the first year carbon reduction was 2 million pounds of carbon footprint reduction. That translates into 41,000 trees that I have to actually to support. They saved nearly 90,000 gallons of fuel that first year, which translates to $357,000. That's one. Okay, new versus old. And it's all got to do with insulation, not the reefer unit and how it works. The other one's a food processor. We're going to talk about best practice. I told you I wrote a guide that's accepted all over the world, best practice. They have two modes of operation on that refrigerated trailer: cycle sentry and start stop. Continuous and start stop. So continuous is like it just runs all the time. It wants to keep it very, so produce open, it gives off ethylene. So it needs to refresh that all the time. They want to be in a very tight window. So continuous run would be in that mode. Stop start is like your air conditioner at the house. Okay.
Right.
You're cooling the ambient air, and then it cuts back on when you get to a threshold. So that's what we're looking for that. We just flipped the switch. So I used telematics, went in to see the customer. They got 50 trailers. Their average fuel burn is a gallon an hour, based on what they were doing. They were in our fleet management, our life cycle management. Annual savings was 2,500 gallons a trailer, and the cost savings was $1.1 million. Last one. All electric, because I know sustainability is kind of a thought process here, is major retailer coffee shop out there. They were doing urban deliveries, 36-foot trailer, multi-temp, compartment was set at 0, second compartment was 34. They do what we call key drops. So the driver goes out there in the middle of the night, opens up, nobody's in there, they make the drop off. The battery started out with 97%, ended at 57%, so plenty of battery life, even though it was 11 and a half hours. So the cost of operational expense, so I'm talking about the maintenance of the unit and the fuel, on an 11 and a half hour run for a diesel unit was $51.75. For that same period, 11 and a half hours, for a unit that was all electric was $3.20. It's a 93% savings on operational. So I say you have to look outside the box. I teach these courses. I teach, and usually it's titled "Nobody Goes Green Unless It Pays Green."
I mean, that is very, very, very true. Very smart, because it's like what I usually say around, if it stops moving, it's not making any money, right?
Well, and they're in a 2% business at best, pushing food down the supply. Pharma, man, you got some money. Whenever I talk to a pharmaceutical company, oh yeah, sure, telematics, if I tell them, hey, here's the cost of it. Hey, I'm trying to push a $5 pizza down the road. I can't afford that.
The incentives are different, right?
Yeah.
The profit margins are different. The reasoning behind that is different. But those are some great examples that you shared, and some big numbers, right? I mean, who doesn't want to save $357,000 all the way up to $1.1 million for the year? Who doesn't want to save 93% of our costs? Everybody's looking at the bottom line. How do we massage that? What does that look like? How do we get rid of some capital that's on the books that we don't necessarily need? How do we know we need this many assets when maybe we absolutely don't? Now, I hate to wind this down because, Don, this has been a great conversation. But last question for you. What do you want everybody to leave with? I mean, we've given them a picture of what the future is going to look like as far as fleets and what they need to be thinking about. But what would you like to leave them with? What's one sort of key takeaway or advice that you'd like to leave them with?
Yeah, it's really coming up, and this period of time is really about managing risk. Okay, we just go back to that. Do you really want to put your money into an asset that's going to depreciate immediately when you get it? Why not just make those payments and then really look at a life cycle and what you should be doing? How do you look at that and run more efficient? Try to look at the refrigerated trailer as not an expense, but how can I cut costs? Look at all the boxes around it. What am I paying in fuel? Okay, we're gonna have the snapback here coming shortly with the great freight recession. How are you going to be able to grow? How are you going to be able? Everybody's looking to just survive. Now we're looking to maintain, and then where's that growth going to come from? You want to put yourself in a position to be able to grow that, to be in a position to get that growth, to be able to add that to your book of business, and really look at ROIs. Sustainability. Some people say, yeah, it's there, no, it's off. There's still money out there. We work with people all the time. We not only do the refrigerated trailer, but we'll do all the infrastructure. We look at all those type of things in that sustainability world, and then of course regulatory compliance. It's not going to impact the trucker per se, but supply chain is going to have a lot of data that they're going to have to keep. You're going to have to keep that record in a sortable spreadsheet for 2 years. This goes all the way down to the restaurant. So if you're a mom and pop restaurant and you serve a hamburger with cheese, tomato, and lettuce, you're going to have a record of that cheese, tomato, and lettuce at that store for 2 years at a mom and pop restaurant. They don't understand that. That needs to be explained.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of, I just had this conversation actually. People who don't think that they're in supply chain are in supply chain. Like it almost touches everybody. And you just gave that example with a mom and pop restaurant that needs to understand where everything's coming from. So as we've heard today, refrigerated transportation is facing one of the most complex operating environments in decades. OEM build times continue to stretch. Regulatory requirements for CDL drivers are tightening. Capacity is shifting unevenly, and fleets are trying to prepare for the next freight upswing while staying compliant and cost efficient. That is exactly where PLM Fleet comes in. Now, with PLM's personalized lifecycle management approach, including advanced business needs analysis, consultative ride-alongs, flexible rental and leasing solutions, and technology-driven solutions, companies are getting the data, the strategy, and the equipment that they need to navigate some of this uncertainty and prepare for what's coming next. Now, if you want more information, if you're looking to track, manage, or flex your fleet, go over to plmfleet.com, or I'm sure you can link up and connect with Don over on LinkedIn, and I'm sure he will be able to answer all of your questions. Now, remember to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Check out more content from the best and brightest over on letstalksupplychain.com. We've got the incredible guests, innovative strategies, and transformative solutions you cannot afford to miss. So, Don, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
It was great to be here, and thank you.
Until next time, I'm Sarah Barnes-Humphrey, and this is Let's Talk Supply Chain.